have José Manuel Barroso and then the President of Germany, who will be arriving shortly as well. And here in the studio with me, I have two people who know all about this cemetery. Well, one who knows an awful lot about it, Glim Prosser. You have studied this very hard, haven't you? I mean, you have worked very hard over the last year to find out the history of San Symphorien. What a history you have come up with.
Yes, indeed. And actually, there are many things about this cemetery that we didn't know this time last year. And in the process of preparing, we've uncovered some really interesting details about the formation of this cemetery. In fact, there was a plan A. There was an alternative site that the Germans originally earmarked for a site to bring together the bodies of the men who'd been buried at the Battle of Mons. That fell through because of bureaucratic and financial difficulties. And they just chanced upon Jean-Huzeau de la Haye one day, walking across his land. A man named Captain Reumer of the German army. He said that he liked the look of that spot and could they build a cemetery there. And Huzeau de la Haye brought them here. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So it was very much a German idea, wasn't it? It was a German officer who came up with this idea in 1916, and de la Haye gave this land to him. He wouldn't sell it to him, would he? But he gave it to him on the basis that both the British and the German dead were treated with equal dignity and respect.
That's right. In fact, there's a tablet at the heart of the entrance of the cemetery in Latin, which describes the donation of the land. That's very important. We've just been talking about Belgium and the occupation, and it was very important that it was a donation rather than being sold.
I must just say there, we can see the President of Germany who is arriving, Joachim Gauck, who has been at the big commemorative event earlier on today in Liège and also was with the French President yesterday in France. And it is an extraordinary event that is taking place here in this cemetery, and a real, I suppose, a tribute to the work that you have done.
Absolutely. I think it's also an expression of the cemetery itself. The cemetery is really a symbol of reconciliation, and the event has very much been inspired by this place. Very special, very unique ambience here. The combination of Belgian, British and German influences, I think, really expresses the spirit with which tonight's events will unfold.
And so many of the relatives, there are about 100 or so here, are the descendants of the men who are buried here, both British and German. But a lot of these people had no idea that their relatives were here until they were contacted by researchers working with you who told them where their dead relatives were.
It's incredible, and we're finding this more and more, that over the centenary period, people are inspired to discover what their own ancestors did. It's always a very special moment, being able to bring a family to the graveside of a relative they never knew often. Maybe they have a photo, maybe they know some details of their lives. But it always seems to be very emotional. I think there's still a connection felt with these people who died so long ago.
And Kate Williams, you're a historian too. You have spent some time here today as well, and you walk around these graves, and the ages, they are so young, aren't they? So many young men who died. But actually, a lot of these men, they were part of the British Expeditionary Force, weren't they? They were the first soldiers to come out here, and they were part of the trained units. Later on, they were even younger.
Yes, it is incredible to look at those ages. And when conscription came in, the upper age in conscription in 1916 was 41. And when you read the accounts of the young soldiers, they really think that over 30, you can't cut it. They're saying about these old men who are falling down and they can't manage it. It is really a young man's game, and it's incredibly moving to walk around here and see the ages. And of course, we have the grave of the first man we believe to have died on the Western Front, which is Private John Parr. And he is not the age he was thought to be. He was only 17, only just 17. And it's incredible to think that these young men lied about their age. They signed up. They were so eager to go to war. But certainly, as you say, the BEF was our professional army, and it was tiny in comparison to that of Germany and France. They had about 1 million men each. We had 80,000. So they set off here, war was declared, and by 9th of August they were here. And what an incredible battle they fought at Mons, holding the line against the Germans when they were so much less of them.
And it was a battle that took place on the 23rd, the 24th of August, and very different to the battles, the subsequent fighting that we are also familiar with that happened in the years to come on the Western Front.
That's right. The Battle of Mons, in fact, was a very important part of the history of the war for many years. I think it's rather been forgotten now. We know far more about the Battle of the Somme and Ypres, those famous battles. Mons had a huge impact on British society. It was really after the news of the Battle of Mons had come through that recruitment really surged. When people saw what a difficulty that BF was in, they really wanted to enlist and help out. The famous Mons Dispatch, printed in the Times. And in fact, all the way back down to the Marne, of course, where the British and the French finally held back that German advance.
Yes, incredible heroism, and it's amazing to go in here and go to the circular graves of the Middlesex Regiment, 46 men from the Middlesex Regiment who fell in Mons, and there's this amazing stone carving in the middle that the German men who were in charge of the site made. It's simply incredible that they're with the enemy buried by the Germans, and I think you're absolutely right about the recruitment. We often think there was a huge surge at the outbreak of war, but most people in Britain thought that the army could deal with it, that they wouldn't necessarily have to go along, and it was Mons, and it was also the news of the atrocities committed on the Belgians, the occupation, that really spurred the British recruitment to surge, particularly among young men.
And Glyn, on that, obviously in the middle, it says the Royal Middlesex Regiment, doesn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Incorrectly.
Indeed, and it's often said that that's because the Germans were so impressed by the ferocity with which the Middlesex fought there that they were inspired to call them a Royal Regiment.
They thought they had to be royal.
Yeah, I think it's probably more likely to be an error. The other main regiments here are the Royal Fusiliers, the Royal Irish Regiment. But if it is an error, it's certainly a respectful error.
And there was a dedication ceremony here, wasn't there? The idea to create the cemetery was in 1916, but it wasn't inaugurated until 1917, September 1917. An amazing event. Tell us about that.
Well, the cemetery looked rather different at that point. It was far more heavily wooded, the German aesthetic of the Waldfriedhof, the forest cemetery. And when you look at the German graves in the area just behind us, the pattern seemed rather unusual. And that's because it would have been rather like walking through a woodland glade and coming across these glades in the clearing.
Which is it's like the Munich Waldfriedhof, isn't it?
That's right, absolutely. And so, of course, after the war, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission took over the site, what was then called the Imperial War Graves Commission, cleared away some of those trees, planted more flowers and gardens, which creates the ambience today. But that moment in 1917 is very significant. There you have Germans who were still fighting the British and their allies, not far from here, only just about 60 miles away at Ypres, pushing slowly towards Passchendaele Ridge. And yet, at that same time, they're here honouring the British and Commonwealth fallen alongside their own.
And the style of the fighting, it changed so much, didn't it, between 1914 and 1918? Because they came here. I mean, the British and the Germans the British were pretty much in khaki, weren't they? The Germans were in grey and green. But the French were out there in their sort of regimental colours with marching bands going into battle.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth putting the Battle of Mons in context. We should remember that only the day before, 27,000 French soldiers had been killed in the Ardennes. So these first few weeks of the war are incredibly destructive. By early September, actually about 500,000 French and German soldiers had become casualties. So this is very significant for Britain.
Yes.
But there are more things going on at this time in the war.
And I think it's the first time which the British in particular understood what war was, because so frequently before that they'd been victorious wars. The Queen had these great empire wars. By the end of Victoria's reign in 1901, we ruled a quarter of the world, and that was, a quarter of the world's population was under the Queen, and she was such a huge force, and there were these massive wars in Africa, and they just didn't impact on the British population in the same way. And they had a very romanticised idea of war. It was these marvellous pictures that they saw. It was the marching bands, it was the music. So really, I think there was a real almost naivety about what war was when people signed up for it. And trench warfare was initially proposed as this marvellous kind of new place in which it would be a modern war, but that wasn't the case at all. I don't think anyone had any idea that it would be such an entrenched setup.
And it's very important, isn't it, to remember that this was not by no means British and German and Commonwealth. I mean, there were Indian soldiers here, weren't there? Huge numbers of Indian soldiers who were sent to the Western Front in September in time for the Battle of Ypres.
Absolutely. The Western Front was one of the most culturally diverse places in the world at that time. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission commemorates more than 1 million men and women from across the former British Empire. So not just from India, but also from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, West Indians too, in fact. So a real multiplicity of different ethnicities, different races, classes and creeds. But of course, they're all commemorated in the same way, with equality of treatment, regardless of their race or their rank or their class.
We can see in the audience there some of the Chelsea pensioners who've been invited this evening. I can see there as well the wife of Michael Holmes-Smith, who we were talking to just a short time ago, who is there as well. A lot of relatives here tonight, about 100 or so, but many other dignitaries and German, Belgian locals who have been invited here.
It's a very significant moment for me. And actually, I think it's an expression of the spirit in which the cemetery was created. I think there's a very close connection between those things. Of course, in 1917, it was only Germans here honouring the fallen. But tonight we bring together representatives from all of the countries who are represented here. We see the President of Ireland there, President Michael D. Higgins. Of course, there are many Irishmen buried in this cemetery. Ireland at that time was part of the British Empire. But many of the men who are now buried here came from Southern Ireland, what is now the Republic. And they played a very important part in the Battle of Mons, the Royal Irish Regiment in particular.
And then the King and the Queen of the Belgians, who are about to arrive shortly. And his great-grandfather, King Albert I, during the war, he didn't leave Belgium, did he?
No, he told the government to leave. I mean, a huge amount of Belgium was occupied. About 95% of it was occupied. The government left, and many of the businesses were taken over by the Germans because a lot of Belgians just refused to work as a way of resisting. But the occupation, constitutionally, the king was required to defend the country, and he did. He remained, he fought, he even enlisted his 14-year-old son as a private, Leopold, and his wife, Queen Elizabeth, she was the queen nurse. She was a nurse on the front line as well. So he led with a great example of bravery, and he really refused to give in, although behind the scenes he was trying to negotiate for peace, but simply neither side would agree to this kind of peace because he was the one who was suffering. He was, an incredible character, and even in Versailles, in the aftermath of the war, he was asking for a less punitive treaty against Germany. He thought they might introduce some kind of revenge, but no one listened to him.
Now we must talk about these wonderful children here. This is Ida and Jules, who are coming forward to present the floral bouquet to the Duchess of Cambridge. Now, Ida has been practicing her curtsy, and Jules has bow. They've been practicing for the last 2 days. Wonderful moment for them. And there, the floral bouquet, beneath the words, "Lest we forget, August 2014. And so now the royal party and the dignitaries will make their way, a short walk, through the cemetery here, towards the stands, ahead of the event this evening. And this event, Glenn, which is a very Anglo-German affair, isn't it?
Absolutely. And again, I think it reflects the spirit of the cemetery. Here we have Germans, British and Commonwealth, and Irish soldiers buried together. And I think it's quite fitting that we should bring together the leading figures from both Britain and Germany at this time. They're just walking past some of the German headstones there. Most of those German soldiers would have come from the north of Germany at that time, from Prussia, Schleswig-Holstein, places like Kiel and Hamburg and Bremen. Many of them came from infantry regiments 75 and 76. So they too are collected alongside men from their local areas.
It's very touching, isn't it, in there to see the unknown soldiers who are on both sides, the German soldier, the British soldier, and that's all that was known about them.
Absolutely. More than 100 of the 513 men who are buried or commemorated here are unidentified.
Unidentified.
For the British, of course, their names are on the memorial at La Ferté-sur-Joie, near the Marne, which commemorates those with no known grave from across the Great Retreat from Mons to the Marne.
And they're walking there through past some of the German headstones, but they are in such close proximity, aren't they, to the British, the Commonwealth headstones. And there are two soldiers buried side by side, a German and an Englishman.
Absolutely. That's a very, very important part of the cemetery, very symbolic. Captain Roy, of course, was buried by the Germans in what was originally the officers' plot. The Germans separated the British officers from the men. That's something that the Commonwealth War Graves Commission didn't, of course, do. But then Gefreiter Reinhold Dietrich, who's buried alongside him, was then buried by the British after the end of the war. So each of them buried by the enemy side, but buried alongside each other, united in death.
And you gave the Duke and Duchess a tour of the cemetery, a private tour this afternoon. What was their reaction?
Well, I think like every visitor here, they were very struck by the beauty of the site, by the history behind it. I mean, in some ways, the cemetery speaks for itself. You can just see the care with which the Germans commemorated the fallen of the British and Commonwealth forces at every turn. And they did comment on how splendid it looked. And of course, that's down to the gardening team, who work here every day of the year, morning, noon and night, to keep it looking in this kind of condition. Of course, they've had a job on their hands with these preparations, but certainly their efforts haven't gone unnoticed.
And Kate, symbolic, do you think that it is the younger royals who are here tonight, carrying on, I suppose, taking on the mantle for future generations?
Yes, in London we have the Duchess of Cornwall is going to be at the Westminster Abbey ceremony. She's going to snuff out the last remaining light because, of course, this evening we have lights out across the United Kingdom and indeed Europe. The Queen has been at the ceremony this morning, and what we really do see here, as you're absolutely right, is the younger royals really doing some of the hard work, the bigger jobs, the travelling. And I think it's really very touching, because what I find so touching is seeing so many young people here. There's a whole group of Boy Scouts here, so many young people coming along, the choirs, and I think that's been really quite a wonderful thing for me as a historian to see in the commemorations, is how interested that the young people are and the children, because it's so important that we never forget, and they're these school children doing big projects, and I think this is really very appealing to them as well, the young royals too.
Well, the royal party have now taken their seats, and the event will now begin.